Welcome back to Business and Life Stories with Mike and James. This week we have our guest joining us is Erica Holthausen. You might not think that's a household name, but amongst authors who are actually published and people who have had their articles in high profile publications, she's very well known. Erica, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mike and James. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to this. And yeah, it's always good to talk with other smart people who have things to say.
I should take that. I should take that sort of every day of the week. Thank you so much, Erica. Mike normally asks the first question, but what I'd really like to say is I'm super excited that you were able to give us a bit of time because I feel that so many of us, there's an author or at least an article within us. And so I'm super excited to learn more about how we can begin to bring out that author, not in a capacity for our own growth, but really so we can serve other people. So with that said and done, Mike, over to you, sir.
Thank you, James. So, Erica, you have a really interesting story about your journey to your company, which you run now, which is called Catchline Communications, and your motto tagline is pitched to published. You didn't start out doing that. You actually went to law school.
Yep.
I can't think of very many lawyers. I can think of a handful of lawyers that have actually gone on to become very well-known and high-profile editors and publishers. So how in the world did you decide to make that jump?
Yeah, it was a very twisty, turny, there are no straight lines in my career path and in my journey. However, at the same time, there are no straight lines, but there's definitely a red thread, and it consistently goes through me. I'm very curious. My top strength finder score is learner. I want to learn all of the things. I want to hear all of the stories. As soon as I learn something well enough, it's very easy for me to get bored. So I like having new challenges. Otherwise, if I'm bored, it is dangerous for everybody because then I become a social scientist and I try to figure out, if I say this to James, what'll happen? So So part of it was, I had wanted to be an attorney from the time I was in middle school and did all the right things, got all the right degrees, went to the University of Virginia School of Law, practiced in Boston. And then suddenly, what do you do when the thing that you have always wanted to do isn't? Mm-hmm. And I got rid of everything that I owned. I joined the Audubon Expedition Institute and lived in a big yellow school bus studying the environment in Colorado. And that was sort of my master reset was, okay, how do I get my head screwed on straight again when this is something I've always been very goal oriented to do? I graduated from college early. I knew what I was going to do. And then it wasn't the thing I wanted to do. So figuring that out, there was a long period of twistiness in there that had highlights of really wonderful mentors who took me under their wing and who I learned a tremendous amount from. I went from being a lawyer to Audubon Expedition Institute to coming back to Massachusetts and ended up working as the first director of marketing and development for an arts organization. I knew nothing about marketing and nothing about fundraising. But I had really great mentors who sort of taught me what to do. And writing has always been the way I process information and I process the world. It's how I understand my own thought process. So I already had that foundation there and I could build on it. And eventually through a couple of additional changes, I was working at a nonprofit organization. And one of the things we did is we had a press week before this decorator show house. Decorator show house is a big old house, usually 30 plus rooms. You have interior designers who decorate every single one of the rooms. And they do all of this work for free. So the week before you open it to the public, you have press week. And that's where I met my very first editor. And the woman who was the editor of the publication Coastal Home, I don't think it exists anymore. A lot of print magazines have gone under. And we'll get to that a little bit later, because that's part of what we're talking about as to why you can even publish in these publications these days. But anyway, I met her there, and at first she asked if I wanted to write for the magazine, and I was like looking around over my shoulder, like, who, me? And she taught me everything about the business. So for the first 3 months, I basically got assignments, and the first article came back and it was a sea of red, and I thought I was just going to like crawl under the closest rock and never come out. And she said, well, what do you mean? It's really good. And I was like, well, what are you talking about? And then she required me to pitch my ideas to her. And I had never pitched, and I thought, well, but you just assigned these to me. Isn't that the way this is going to work? So she kept pushing me to learn more skills and to learn how to do all of this stuff. Long story longer, I am Irish, so I can have a conversation with a brick wall. Long story longer, after a little while, she got me my first editing job. So that's stuff that I've always done on the side. For the last over a decade, I've been a freelance writer and freelance editor on the side of the job that was paying my bills. And when I first started Catchline Communications, because I had been in marketing for so long, I thought, well, I'll do content marketing. And I was working with a business coach and just said, I'm so over marketing. And he was like, well, that's a problem. And we ended up talking about a client I had at my previous company. So this is also my second go round, because she can be taught. So at my previous company, I had worked with an environmental health and safety management consultant, and I had a friend who was an editor for a trade journal for that publication, and they were looking for a writer. And I told my client, like, hey, you have to do this. I didn't fully understand all of the reasons why. I just knew that it was an opportunity that he would be kicking himself for if he didn't take it. And I loved everything about that project. And I told this story to my coach, and he says, so why don't you do that? And I was like, well, why don't I do what? And finally, light dawns on Marblehead, and I realized that this was something that really tapped into more of the things that I really love. I love articles. I love profiles. I love magazines. I still subscribe to a bunch of them. Like, that is something that I've always enjoyed. And I've loved writing in order to serve, not writing in order to serve thyself. So, and content marketing is a lot about SEO. Good stuff is valuable, but there's a lot of crap out there. So this became one of the things that it was like, okay, the folks who want to get published in high visibility publications, whether it's the big business magazines like Entrepreneur, Inc., Fast Company, or whether it's industry trade journals or associations, those are folks who are writing in order to really share valuable information. It's not just about, driving consumer action. So that's sort of the twisty tale of how I got to where I am today.
And the reason I wanted you to highlight that for us is so that in the next few questions we're going to ask about the mechanics of how you help people, I wanted the audience to really understand you've been there.
Yeah.
You started out not being the scion of some great publishing empire. You started from zero, and you got going, and then you were back and forth to zero again, just like most of us.
Mm-hmm.
And you said something super profound. So many of the people that James and I run into will say things like, well, I have an Amazon bestseller, but when we go look on the Amazon ranking, it's, ranked like number 500 bazillion down the list. It's not anywhere near the top 10. Mm-hmm. And there also seems to be the same time, this weird mentality among some startups that they want to publish articles to be more visible, but what they're publishing isn't really valuable.
Yeah.
So it sounds like one of the things a person really needs to think about as they're writing is, how does this article serve? Who does this help? Do I have that right?
Yeah, and that's one of the benefits of working for writing for a publication is there's an editor on the other side, and they will say no. The good publications will say no if the article's not good. If the article is not serving their audience, they just won't publish it. So you can't really get away with some of the shenanigans that have happened, on blogs and in other places, because there's an editor there who's saying, if this doesn't serve my audience, you're not adding value to me, to the magazine, or to our readers. And they need to add value to the readers because they need the readers to come to the website and hang out. And read the things, because it's all comes to advertising revenue. And that's what they're really needing, is you have to provide value. Otherwise, it's not worth the editor's time to even really look at your stuff. So it has to be an exchange of value for value. You're offering really valuable information. The publication is offering a huge platform. And that's one of the things, quickly, because I'm often kind of talked about in the same world as folks who are writing books. Books are great, but books do not have a platform. When you write an article for a publication, they already have established readers. So that can be a really great way to connect with those readers. It can also be an amazing way to either start the process of writing your book, because as you do the research, 1,000 words is a hell of a lot easier to write than 30,000 to 80,000 words for a book. So those 1,000-word articles can help you start developing your ideas. And some of the best business writers, Dory Clark and Cal Newport, you can always tell when they're working on a new book, because what they write about in the articles that they publish shifts. And then sure enough, 6 to 12 months later, they're out with a new book. And you can see how their thought process develops over time if you are a nerd like me and you follow their articles closely.
That reminds me of Terry Pratchett, a fiction writer, but it was all political satire. He just put it as fiction so as not to be sued, is what he always told me. What he said. He would do that same thing. When you started seeing him writing editorials and opinion pieces in the British press, you knew a new book was coming.
Yeah, because it's such a great way to use. You're already doing work. Why not use it now? And you can start to build your platform. You can start getting people excited about this topic that you are coming out with. So then it kind of primes the pump. And all of a sudden people know, oh, we're talking about this. And then it's like, and I have a new book on this. If you've been following that person as they're writing these articles, they definitely, they are very likely to get that book.
So what do you think is the split amongst all of the amateur writers? How many people are trying to get published in order to be visible versus how many are trying to get published because they think they have something that's really valuable to share?
That's a great question. So if you look at the internet and spend any time clicking on things, there's a lot of garbage out there. There's a lot of, great headlines that you click on and then you're like, well, that was basic. And, that's 5 minutes of my life I'm never going to get back because you didn't add anything valuable. So there is a lot of that online. And some of it is, I was a marketer for a very long time, and I sometimes use hashtag marketers ruin everything. Some of that is because for a while, when blogs first became a thing, you had quote unquote experts, and blogs were like a hot second old, and people who describe themselves as experts were saying, you have to blog every single day. How are you going to put out something that is quality, that is thoughtful, that is original, that has any depth to it, if you're trying to churn something out every single day while you're running a business? You're not. It's not possible. So there's a lot of junk out there. And then there's the whole, if you're trying to deal with Google and all of the algorithms and make sure that you're being found, like that's another layer, because SEO requires you to go through certain hoops. So people jump through the hoops, and that's a piece of it. And then there's also the whole piece about writers. So this is my wobbly on writing. Writers are typically undervalued. When I started writing for publications, I was routinely getting paid at least $1 a word. It is really hard to find that pay scale these days in publications. And there's a lot of messaging out there that's like, oh, you can write your book in 30 days. I'm sorry, that book's probably going to be crap. Unless
most likely, yeah.
If you're starting from scratch and you're writing a book in 30 days, the book's going to be garbage. There's this thought that writing is supposed to be fast, that it's supposed to be something that you can do really easily. And that's not true. That's not honoring the craft of writing. Your first draft should be fast, and it should be shit. That's the whole point of a first draft. But then you really have to structure it and craft it and make sure that you're really clear so that you can bring the writer or the reader with you step by step along the way. And that's something that people often forget, because they think, because there are so many people who say, oh yes, I write a blog post every single day and I write it in 30 minutes. Well, good on you. But most people can't do that, nor should they, if they really want it to be thoughtful.
Do you think it helps to produce a better quality article if a person puts themselves more in the mindset of using some deliberation and some actual thought, sort of like the old writing with a pencil or even a quill pen instead of typing? Does that mechanical process help slow your brain down?
I think it can, especially so for those of us of a certain age, myself included. My first draft is always pen on paper, always, because there's something about the connection between the hand and the brain. And I do a lot of what's called free writing exercises, where I'll set a timer, 10 minutes, I have a prompt, and you just have to write and you can't stop. And if you get stuck, you say, what I really want to say is. And there's a magic that happens around, first 7 minutes, you're writing trash. Someplace around the 7-8 minute mark, I start seeing things on the page that I didn't think about before, because it's tapping into a layer below. Now, that being said, for my nephews who grew up with, computers, trying to get them to write pen on paper, I'd be more successful asking them to get a root canal surgery that was not needed without Novocaine. So, it's just not going to happen. For them, the typing really is the thing that works. So, but I do think that there is something to that kind of connection into your brain and into some of the deeper level thinking.
James looks like he has a question. He's got that look.
I have got a question, but I would just like to comment or add a thought to writing, the concept of writing to an audience. And so my first mentor, Evan Pagan, a great marketer, one of the original, what I call the godfathers of online marketing, along with Jeff Walker and Frank Kern and whatnot. And it was always that. It was really producing content which spoke to, there's a phrase, the pain point or the issue or the challenge which is going on in your target audience's head. And if you can present that in a clearer way or a more structured way than what they're thinking about at 2 o'clock in the morning, and then you can provide a solution for that, then that's when really the engagement and possibly leads to a sale, but certainly the engagement starts. And I'd never really made that connection with article writing, but what I'm hearing is that it's as important in article writing as it is in marketing. Like, there does seem to be a bit of a bridge there about about how to produce the high quality marketing content or high quality articles, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's always, you have to keep your reader in mind. Otherwise, what the heck are you doing? And the editor certainly will have the reader in mind. And if you're talking, so if you decide that you want to write for Inc. and you write something to sort of rank and file employees, Inc. will reject it because they're talking to the C-suite. That's who their audience is. That's who they want you to be writing for. So one of the things that this is a Stephen King. Stephen King has a great story about it in his On Writing, which is I love that writing book. But one of the things that he says is his mentor taught him, you write the first draft with the door closed. That's where you put, like, it's you telling the story to yourself, but it's also, that's where all of your darlings go, all of those things that you think are really nifty keen and you want to work in there that have nothing to do with nothing. That's where the mess is. And then the second draft, the rewrite, is when you open the door and you're inviting the reader in, and you're now having to rethink about how you are going to structure this so that that person is getting what they need out of it. That they have a reason to read the article and spend their time. And the reader's time, I don't care who you are as a writer, the reader's time is always worth more than your own. Because if you don't have any readers, again, what are you doing?
Fantastic. I think, although this isn't the question which I was thinking of, that actually led me to another question, which I always like to explore a little bit about vulnerability and fear. I just feel that that's where, from a coaching perspective, that's a lot of where our growth is sort of hibernating. And if we can delve in there, then the growth kind of expands out of there. And I actually wrote an article for an online forum. It was a health-related article. And I definitely had to go into that vulnerability place. Like, it turned out to serve their audience really well. And I got some lovely feedback of it helping others, which is what my intention was. But it is that it's the door closed. Yeah, I can write, as you said, all the things which we might think are great or fantastic. We open the door a bit for the second draft, and people are going, "Oh my goodness! Like, James, what are you doing here?" There is a little bit of feeling vulnerable there, isn't there? And a bit of ego crushing, which is never a bad thing. I mean, for us males, it's an inherently painful process to have our ego crushed even minutely. But that's obviously part of the process, isn't it? To be a little bit vulnerable and have trust maybe in the editing process. So when the finished article does come out, it's, whew, that was quite a journey, but I now see where we were going.
Yeah. So when I first started writing articles for magazines, once they were finished and published, I never read them again. When they came out in a print publication, I have a stack of magazines that have my articles in them. I have never read the articles again because I know that I am going to see something that I don't like, and there's not a damn thing I can do about it because it's print. So that was, and there's a huge, still to this day, with articles that either I am really invested in or that took a bit of a different turn than maybe what I was expecting, because just because you're writing it doesn't mean that you're in charge, because you're not. Magic happens in the writing process. So it can still be scary for me to hit the send button, because what if my editor hates it? What if it doesn't work? What if it's not nearly as engaging and as captivating as I think it is? And there's a huge amount of vulnerability in this, because it's also greater visibility brings with it greater scrutiny. Somebody is not going to like what you have to say. Somebody is going to disagree with you, guaranteed, because that's, if nobody is disagreeing with you, that's the other point. If nobody is disagreeing with you, Are you really saying anything that needs to be said? Maybe
Never.
not.
Yeah.
So
No,
yeah,
no good thought goes unchallenged.
right.
We often, whoever we might look up to as an example of maybe a great entrepreneur or a great business person, or most probably a great writer, they have had their fair share of what the Z generation like to call haters. Like,
Yeah.
there are plenty of critics out there,
Yeah.
and you're absolutely right. I mean, I think as probably as a marketeer and as a author, surely part of our purpose is to antagonize a certain element of the maybe the wider audience, to maybe shuffle a few brain cells around, say, so they actually maybe read it a second time and go, well, I don't necessarily agree with it, but my perception's changed a little bit. Like, I can actually see where that person's coming from now, and maybe that has been worth another 5 minutes of my time, and I'll just think on that for next day or two. I mean, that is surely a very important purpose, isn't it, to sort of ruffle a few feathers?
I think so. So two different ways to answer this, both resulting in yes. But the first is, one of the greatest gifts you can give your reader is helping them think differently and think about something more deeply and tickling their gray matter. And it does not matter if they agree with you or disagree with you. That's not, unless you're, most of the time that is not your job. Your job is to put something out there and get somebody to really be thinking about it and to challenge their ideas and at least open their mind to something different. So there's that piece. There's also, when we are, part of why you are going to be writing for these high visibility publications is to build your authority and to build your business. I am so okay with turning off the wrong people. If there are people, like, as long as you fire up the people who are your people, that's amazing. Because the truth is, like, how can any of us believe, like, I don't like everybody who I met. How can I possibly believe that everybody's going to like me? I'm a strong cup of tea. Some people dig it, some people don't. Like, have your thing, tell your story, because the people who are going to resonate with it are going to immediately be like, oh, this is my person. I want to know more. I want to read more. I want to understand what they're doing. I really like the perspective that they are bringing. If you're milquetoast and you're just like plain old vanilla and not ruffling any feathers ever, like, you're not going to incite anybody's emotional response to you or to your work. You're just going to fly below the radar screen.
And that is exactly where so many startup companies come from. It comes, it's a different application than you're talking about, but it's the same idea. When I worked in the rocket business, we all lived in the cubicle farm, 18 hours a day, and come up for daylight once in a while. It was like anything outside the norm, outside the boundaries, was immediately squashed, crushed, destroyed, obliterated. So They wanted everybody to be vanilla. Problem is, now all of a sudden you got people that are very creative who are thinking, well, my company boss, or in the case of a publication, it would be my editor, isn't going to care. So I'm going to go do this myself. And this is how so many startups get going. So James and I run into a lot of people trying to publish a book as a way to help build their company. And we've always thought that seems a bit of a distraction from where your time should be spent. So one of the reasons I was really excited to have you here is because you have this tremendous gift and program to help people get off that mindset and get an article, which is much less of a time commit, into a high profile place that, as you just said, fires up the people you're looking for. So if someone I'll just pick on somebody I already know. Let's say that Steven wants to have a company, and he does. He's a real guy, but he's got his business going. Now, what is the typical path for somebody is to send an article to an editor at a publication they want to try to get into? How do you help with that? Because what you do is so magic, and I can't explain it better than you do. You're a professional writer.
So first, I would say put it in reverse, because it's not about which publication you want to get into. It's about what are your business goals. Everything that you do, every visibility tactic that you decide to undertake, there should be a business goal attached to it. Preferably more than one, because there are a lot of ways to build your visibility. Podcasting is one. So knowing what your goal is and what those business goals are and how the tactic that you are considering can actually help you achieve those business goals is the very first step. Because once you know what those goals are, that then informs choosing which publication you're going to write for, because every publication has different guidelines. So a great example, say you are doing this and you know that you want to profile either clients or other experts in the field, and you want to be able to interview these folks so that you can build those relationships and grow your business that way. Well, you can't write for entrepreneur, because entrepreneur does not allow you to profile other experts. They want your expertise. You can quote a household name, but you can't profile anybody. Inc., however, is perfectly happy to have you interviewing other experts and profiling other people in the articles that you're writing. So those business goals serve a really helpful filter test. And that's sort of the first filter that you bring when you're evaluating different publications. And then it's evaluating publications in terms of brand fit. Is this a publication I want to be affiliated with? Because honestly, anything that's owned by BuzzFeed, I have zero interest in, because they irritate. If you go to a homepage of a publication and the headlines make you roll your eyes, that is not the right publication for you. I don't care how popular it is. So you narrow it down based on your business goals, based on your brand and which publications you want to be affiliated with, who you're trying to reach. Sometimes you're trying to get in front of clients, and sometimes you're trying to get in front of other experts. So that also makes a big difference, because high visibility does not just mean fancy publication that everybody knows, like Inc. or Entrepreneur. High visibility, if you're an environmental health and safety management consultant, high visibility means EHS Today. It's a trade journal that no normal person would ever read or even knows about. It's something that's read by people within that industry. So that is the whole first part of everything that I do with my clients, is figuring out what is the right publication, because most of the time, not always, but most of the time, it isn't the one that you come in thinking it is. So that strategy part first, then how do you pitch this publication? Because again, every publication has different guidelines. Some require a pitch. Some want you to pitch one article. Some want you to pitch an entire column. Some, it's more of an application process. More and more of them are pay to play, like Forbes. So then it depends, okay, how do you actually get into this? And then it's how do you structure your articles for that publication? How do you build your relationship with your editor if you're lucky enough to write for a publication that has an assigned editor? That's less and less common these days. And then what do you do with the thing? Because just because you have a great article on Inc.com does not mean that the hordes are going to come knocking down your door. So you have to think about, once it's there, going back to those original goals and figuring out, okay, how can I now use this piece to level up my business, to get to that next level, to accomplish these goals that I set at the very beginning?
I'm really glad you shared this. This is fascinating to me. So it sounds like many of us are falling in the same trap over and over of thinking of this backwards.
It's easy to do.
Right.
Like,
so if we start with the business goal and then start with who's our people, who are we trying to reach, then the article almost starts to write itself, because we already know what's the idea in us that wants to come out.
Right.
But now we've got to, yeah, see, in school, we were all taught to start with an outline, write the article, and hope somebody liked it, right?
Right.
This is the
And
exact opposite.
strategy, I mean, James has certainly experienced this. Strategy is never sexy. Nobody wants to spend time on
No.
strategy. They want to go right to the tactics. But the tactics are useless if you don't have a solid strategy in place and know what the heck the point of those tactics actually is.
That actually reminds me of a very funny brief story. I had the opportunity in my life to know a number of fiction authors. And Joe Haldeman became very famous in the 70s with a book called The Forever War. And, you know, the apocryphal story was he wrote it in 21 days. Well, I heard him give a talk once, and he said, yeah, that is true. But the story formed in my head during my 18 months in Vietnam with the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
And when I get home, as I'm sitting in the hospital recovering, for 21 days, I did nothing but write. So it wasn't like I wrote the whole, it's like it was already there.
Yeah.
And just that seems like it's the thing with so many business people. The idea's there, bust them to get out, which I love, because you have a whole blog about that on your website about, hey, it's great you have this idea. Now here's some things to do with it.
Yeah. And, you know, when it comes to writing, it's not about the ink. It's about the think. You have to think both about the subject matter, like what is the idea that you are trying to get out there? What is it that you want to be known for? And you can't be known for 30 different things. Like,
No.
What is the one thing that you actually want to be known for? So we know we as editors know, like, oh, okay, this is where they belong. So the first part of the think is knowing your area of expertise. And as experts, that part you've got. So you think that you're done. But then the second part of the think is, how are you going to structure this article? And how are you, one of the biggest challenges for experts is, because we know our areas of expertise really deeply, we can see, we're like that room in A Beautiful Mind. We can see how everything connects to everything else. The reader can't. The reader doesn't, like, so you really have to get narrow and deep and be super specific. So the hardest part is usually, and the biggest thinky part is, how do I structure this in a way that's actually going to get my point across? And when you only have 750 to 1250 words, the only way you are saying something that is really meaningful is if you are super, super narrow so that you can go deep. If you're trying to be too broad, you're saying what everybody else is saying.
And that really belongs more in a novel or book length writing, doesn't it? When you're expanding beyond the narrow thing.
Yeah, and that's why articles can help you get there, because the more you can take whatever your idea is, you know, people are often saying, you know, but what if I run out of things to say? You won't. Like, if you like to think, you will not run out of things to say, because you will, every time we peel back a layer and think, now I really know my stuff. Like, the universe is like, no, you don't. Here you go. How are you gonna deal with this? And then there's another layer and another layer, or you put together something that's really fantastic, and you post it on LinkedIn and somebody makes a comment and you're like, I never thought of that. It adds another layer. There's always more nuance, and there's always something deeper. So that's the other, frankly, for me, that's the joy of this, is it helps me. The better a writer I am, the deeper a thinker I am, the better a writer I am. And it's this like amazing cycle, and that's pretty amazing. That's just cool.
That is very cool.
Brilliant. Just brilliant.
James looks like he has more questions.
Well, we are running out of time, but for me, it was so enlightening, almost reverse engineering what so many of us were initially kind of maybe told, or we imagined a way to write. again, I think it comes back to what I learned within marketing and coaching as well. Like the very best marketeers, they might be read by 10,000 people, but each article feels as though it's being written for me. And again, it's the same with the coaches. The very best coaches, and we see this time and time again, but the very best coaches are very narrow in their niche. Like some people say that they can work with everyone, and then other people, no, I'm just working with such a defined niche. And I always imagine it's a bit like kind of you're walking along and you see this little hole in the ground. And you think, oh, what a boring looking hole, but I'll just chuck a piece of rope down there and see where it leads. And then you go in the hole, and it's like, what's this cavern? And there's like, oh my goodness, it's just this amazing experience. And that then leads, that niche just leads to a whole different world, the nuances, the depth of content, and then that circles back to the business goals. So I'm so very grateful that you were able to enlighten us. And how do people get to work with you? How can they approach you? Mike normally does this, so I'm going to mumble along and bumble along, but we will obviously include all your relevant links. But just to finish off here, what is the best way that people can contact you?
Yeah, so the one and only social media platform that I am on is LinkedIn, which is delightful because I don't have to deal with any of the nonsense of the others. So, connecting with me on LinkedIn, that's where I am most active. Checking out my website, it's catchlinecommunications.com. And every month I do a free pitched to published event. And it's 1 hour, it's on Wednesdays. I do about 10 minutes of training on a very specific topic, and then I just open the floor to questions. So I don't care what questions you have. I will do my level best to answer them unless they're totally off topic and you want to know the meaning of life, because I got no clue. So that's another, right? That's another way for folks to sort of start getting acclimated to the language of writing for publication, of what articles look like, to sort of get their head around it without having to go deeper. But also all of my programs, including pricing, are up on my website. So that's a good way to also start giving yourself an idea of, okay, this is what it would look like if it's the right thing for you. If you feel about writing like I feel about Facebook, don't write. There's so many other ways to do this.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
Thanks for being with us, Erica.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure, gentlemen. This was great.
Thank you so much. It's been so much fun.